Hello everybody, this is Jerry Gatka here for the Top of the Morning Show. And I just can't wait for the show to start today because our guest is so interesting. She's had such a varied background. She's from my generation. She has so many things to talk about. You'll love it. Stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome everybody. I'm Jerry Gatka for the Top of the Morning Show, and I'm here today with our guest, who is Janice Eastmorehead Grant. Now, I'm looking at parts of your bio, and I can't remember the last time I met someone with such an interesting experience background. Let's start with where you are today. You're a retired teacher, correct?
I am.
All right, and that's locally here in Maryland?
It is. It's in Harford. I've retired in Harford County.
And how long did you teach there?
I taught in Harford County 11 years.
Okay.
Then I went to Nashville, Tennessee for 4 years.
So I want to get into that a little bit later, but you're a retired teacher from Harford County. You're a minister?
I am. Ordained.
Ordained minister. You're a writer.
Yes.
Where do you find time to do all this?
I don't sleep much.
And you've written a book from your teaching experience, right? A math book?
I wrote one I have about my Peace Corps experience.
Okay.
And then
let's get into that.
Right. My husband and I joined the United States Peace Corps in Nashville, Tennessee.
What caused you to do that?
Well, I had joined before President Kennedy, before the ink was dry, when he first proposed Peace Corps. And then when I married, my husband wanted to go. We were assigned to Ethiopia. Wow. And then we went to Liberia, West Africa. We were involved for 5 years with the Peace Corps, teaching and just teaching school, teaching people to read and write, teaching them how to grow foods, and then health care, and anything that needed to be done.
Now, I remember one particular piece from what I read in your bio about your teaching experiences in Africa, and primarily with older people.
Well, actually, we were in 2 high schools.
Okay. One
in the interior, where we lived for a while. It was Bonga. They call it Bonga. Because the English call it the click sound because they can't say
I don't think I could either.
Well, they do in South Africa. But then we left that and went to Monrovia, the capital city, and taught in a Catholic school. And there we had a TV program for 4 years. It was an all-girls school, and then I had a radio program.
In Africa?
In Africa.
Now, did you do this in, Voice of America, so it wasn't English? Okay.
Yeah, but it spanned 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, but they don't call it Europe, they call it Eurasia. Because there's no separation between Europe and Asia, just a Ural
Yeah,
mountains.
I've seen that on the map where they have the separation, but when you actually go there, it's not there in reality.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
They have the Ural Mountains. And the program was called Eternal Love Winning Africa. Wow. ELWA was the
station. Did you name that yourself? Or
no, that was there before I came.
Okay. But I'm particularly curious, you had mentioned something about teaching the older people, and you used the phrase, making the book talk.
Oh, they love it. I love to hear the Africans talk.
That's interesting.
They will say, I don't have a book, but they would say, please, Mom, which is a title of respect, teach me like you do to teach the book to talk. And that means teach me to read. And they learn so quickly. Most people can speak 4 or 5 languages. In my village, the children spoke 4 languages. My son was only 3, and he spoke 3 languages. Children learn so much more rapidly than adults. And they're extremely brilliant people.
And you also spoke very passionately about the music.
Oh, I love the music.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the music talks. You hear, and the music, everything has a meaning. Names have a meaning, music has a meaning, and whenever the people in the village talk, everyone is sitting around. The children are respectful. That's why they know so much. They listen to the adults. And where I lived, they never left children alone. They were always on someone's back. So they knew what was going on. And I carried my son on my back.
Are the hand movements part of the music and telling a story as well? Because I
Sometimes,
noticed
yes.
that you're very proficient.
Yes. Well, in Ethiopia, this means Ethiopia when you do your
Okay.
hands like this. And the Emperor Haile Selassie, this is the way he always stood, regal like that, the Lion of Judah. He came to our country once also when our president died.
So you've met emperors as part of your experience. Let's go on a little bit beyond the Peace Corps. You also were a freedom rider.
Oh, that goes way back. I had a friend, Mickey Schwerner, who was he was a...
Way back meaning you were a teenager at the time?
Oh, no.
Younger?
I was a teacher, and my friend had asked Walter Carter. I had been working with him with the sit-ins here in Baltimore and throughout Maryland and the NAACP National. I was the director of desegregation for the state of Maryland, so I had an opportunity to go all over. And then later I was president of the NAACP in my county.
All right.
And so when Walter asked someone to go to Jackson, Mississippi, I volunteered and I drove from Maryland to Mississippi.
And for a time frame, this is back in the 60s?
1964.
Okay.
And we had what was called the Freedom Schools. That was Dr. Bob Moses, Robert Moses, actually.
Just for our audience's benefit, can you tell us a little bit of the background about what was going on in Mississippi at that time?
Well, there were a lot of murders, a lot of lynchings, and 20 churches were burned at that time because we used the churches to register voters. And every time we registered voters in a church, it was burned down. So we went to investigate. Our office was on Lynch Street, 1017 Lynch Street, which was named after a member of Congress, John Lynch. And this is what we call the COFO office, Council of Federated Organizations, which was the NAACP, SCLC, Dr. King's group.
You're getting into really great details, and I want you to continue, but we're going to have to take a short break right now, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry Getka, host for your Top of the Morning show, and I'm here with Janice Grant. You mentioned, very simply, they treat and raise children differently there than is done here. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, the children are very, very respectful of adults. The older you are, the more respect you have. Where I lived in Africa, and the children learn so much by sitting around listening to the adults.
Okay.
They don't separate the children.
Instead of watching TV, okay.
Right. Now, when I moved to Monrovia, the capital city, named after James Monroe, one of our presidents, it was a city, just like any city. I had a fine apartment. I was right across from the Peace Corps office. The simple car was the BMW and the
That's pretty
Mercedes.
simple.
And the Mercedes, because they were close to only 8 miles between that and Europe, Italy and those places. And I learned so much history.
I'd like to get back to the children again. Is there some way that you can suggest, perhaps, that we might be able to change the culture here and get the children to be that respectful, the same as they are there?
I would like to see that. One thing about it, they understand, I guess, growing up, that the older you are, the more respect you give to the person, because age means wisdom. And they grow up understanding that. And they will They call us Ma, which is a title of respect. Ma. Some people may resent that. Like they call, I think in the southern states, which we are in Maryland, they call people mother when you're older.
Okay.
I think that's a title they get. But the children, everyone wants to learn. And one of the differences, they have to pay usually to go to school.
Okay.
They have to buy uniforms so that no one feels someone is dressed better than I am. And in one school, it was blue pants or skirts and white tops. And we only paid the young people who work for us, which is what you do to help the economy, $10 a month.
Okay.
Of course, we paid $20 because it was two of us. People said we were spoiling
So an
them.
education in Africa is not a right or a privilege, it's something you earn, if you have to pay for it.
Usually, and I think that's what makes them study harder.
Oh.
And one of my students is now, she was ambassador to the Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. Now she's ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, you mentioned one of your students. I also noticed in your written bio that you talked about bringing 4 children here.
Oh, 5.
5 children.
Right.
Tell us about that.
We adopted one girl. She's an adult now. She's ordained also. She lived in Guam and Alaska. Now she's in California.
Okay.
And we brought children of our friends. We had 2 girls that stayed with us. One girl, she was so brilliant. She spoke French like a Frenchman, Jackie Aquay. And she got a full scholarship right away. She was in the 9th grade, but she knew so much, they just put her in the 10th grade.
Okay.
And now the other girl lives in, she bought a home in Georgia, and the other 2 live in different parts. Well, I think one is Texas, and I've forgotten the other town. But we had foster children. We had 7 foster children. I was a foster child myself for about 7 years.
I think I've lost track of all your family with 4 children brought over, 5 children brought over, and 7 foster children. While we sort this out, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Now, Janice, I understand you've been in civil rights virtually all your life.
All my life.
All your life. And you were a freedom rider, you worked in Mississippi, and I can't imagine having the courage to go there at that time.
Well, I think when you're younger, it doesn't bother you as much. I was a young woman then. I was a teacher, so I had 5 Jewish girls from New York that lived with me. And I have to tell you this, we lived in the Verdon edition of Jackson. And there was a wonderful old lady we called Ma Chank. And we were in a safe house. And every night, a different African American or man of color would stand guard over our house with a gun. Wow. So that if anyone came, he said, I'm not, one of the preachers said, I'm not, what were we called? Nonviolent.
Okay.
He said, if anyone comes after me, I'm going to look up to heaven and say, Lord, I'm coming home, but I'm bringing company. But we would go and investigate the churches, and one church in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where they had captured our friends and killed them, the 3 civil rights workers, Mickey Schreiner, Andy Goodman, and James Chaney. Now, Mickey and I had been freedom riders together, so it was real close to me. And we were always supposed to report, call back to let people know where we were and that we were safe. And when they didn't call back, we knew something was wrong. Now, Andy had just gotten to Jackson that day, and he asked Mickey if he could go with him to investigate the church. So they did go. When we didn't hear from them, we knew something was wrong. The sheriff and 19 of his deputies, they let them out of jail after they had arrested them, followed them, captured them, burned the car, said they'd gone to Cuba. Some people may remember that. But
Well, that's a good point, because I understand what you're saying, because my generation, I lived through that as well. So I understand it. But for generations today who have no conception of what it was like at that time frame in the South, is there some movie or something that's even close to some of the experiences that you went
there
through
was
that
one
that our audience could look at to get a
called
feel?
Mississippi Burning.
Great.
And that's one I can't look at, when they capture the boys. Because what had happened, Jimmy Chaney was the African-American man of color, and they had chained him to a tree and beat him with chains. And of course, immediately Mickey was shot to death, because Mickey was the leader. And I have to say this, they said, oh yeah, you're the nigger lover. And then of course, Andy, we believe he was buried alive, even though he was shot, because the FBI paid a Klansman $25,000 to find out where they were. And one morning we were getting ready to go to school, and Ma Chank had the TV on, and we heard that they had found the boys. They were buried in a dam, and we saw the foot of one of them, a shoe, and a pant leg. I couldn't look at it anymore. But Andy had dirt clenched in his hand. They thought he was trying to dig his way out. But the doctors, when they were doing the autopsy, one doctor fainted and the other regurgitated. They said they'd never seen anything like
And these were real-life experiences that you went through in your lifetime.
Oh, yes.
So for the generations today, they need to understand and accept where their gifts of freedom came from.
Yeah.
They came from people like you.
Well, we worked with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. The older people will remember Fannie Lou Hamer, who had been a sharecropper and had been beaten so badly. But she was one of those that went to the Atlantic City.
Okay.
And she used to say how tired she was. I'm sick and tired of being tired. She came to Baltimore often and talked. And of course, Fannie died later of cancer, but I don't even want to talk about what happened.
I'm really curious. You've been back to Mississippi since then, and is there a difference?
There is a difference. We went back, the NAACP actually had one of their conventions rather, in Jackson. And a lady not of color took care of my son when he was a child. And then, of course, I've been back only, once since then because of Dr. King's. Now, when he did come, now, that was exciting. And then, of course, we had, so many entertainers.
You say it was exciting. Why? Please tell us more.
People would come, Peter, Paul, and Mary, to entertain us. We were at Tougaloo College, which is right outside of Jackson. That's where we were housed. And Pete Seeger came. I think it was Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and some others came. It was amusing. They were trying to say who would sleep on the outside of the bed at that time, because this is 1964. And they had dragged the Tallahatchie River and the Pearl River for the bodies of the boys before they found them. President Johnson sent the CBs down to, you can see that in the movie, to dig. Now, they found bodies, but they didn't find the boys, of course. And
Well, we certainly know and accept the fact that that was a very important time frame in our history of this country.
black people, as we were called then, we had all kind of names we've had, but the two of us were not, you and I couldn't ride together.
Okay.
But once there was I don't remember his name, a professor from Stanford. Stanford has the option, publish or perish. So he came.
That's true with most college
Is that right?
professors.
So he came to Jackson, and he invited me to come with him and the girls to their hotel to eat. I had no problem. They let me eat. However, we were going to Yazoo City because the young girls from New York and one of the young men said, "Janice, I can't believe that you can't eat in any of these restaurants." And of course, everywhere we went, we couldn't. Then we decided we'd go to see the Professor James Silver.
Okay.
He wrote a book called Mississippi, the Closed Society. So we went to Ole Miss. Well, they had to lay on the floor to sleep because they would shoot in their house constantly. And we were able to go and talk with him, get one of his books, and get it autographed.
You mentioned during one of the breaks that you had an experience where you had to hide in a trunk.
I was the only one with a car. As I said, I had driven from Aberdeen, Maryland to Jackson. And I'd never say where I was going. I'd always say the next town. I wouldn't go through Georgia. Georgia was worse than Mississippi at that time. So the girls and the guys were with us, and somehow a huge Great Dane ran into the car, and the radiator was burst. So we lost all the water.
Okay.
I had a Chevrolet, I don't remember what year it was, but it was somewhere along that time. And so some people came along, and they didn't see me at first. And then when they saw me, they said, "We're going back to town and get someone, we're going to take care of you." Then a black family came along and took all the Jewish friends of mine with them. And I waited in my car. And surprisingly, they did come back and get me, but no one touched the car. Normally, they would have burned it, but it was there the next day.
That's absolutely incredible. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jerry Getka, host for your Top of the Morning show, and I'm here with Janice Grant, trying to get into all the various things in your background, which are also interesting. You say now that you're involved in a project about restoring, you mentioned during the break, that
Right,
you're
exactly.
involved in a project about restoring a historic home.
Yes, actually, it belongs to my family. In 1917, my great-grandmother, I never met her, she passed before I was born, and then my grandmother, her daughter, and her other daughter, my grand-aunt, purchased 4 acres of land in Aberdeen.
Okay.
And so we now my husband and I own that property.
Not on the military base, I hope.
No, it's right in Aberdeen proper.
Okay.
And for years, the town has tried to take that property from us by any means possible. So they tried to get us to demolish the house. We need grants or restoration projects, whoever would want to help us to restore that home. And we call it historic because my aunt...
Now, do you want them to contact you directly or some
Directly.
organization?
Well, I have an organization called the Carpenter's House Ministries.
Okay.
And we give scholarships and do quite a few things. But my aunt was an aide, if you can believe this, in 1929 to FDR, President Roosevelt.
Okay.
And during the war, she asked permission, and she was granted that to become a nurse during World War II. And she became a nurse. Then when Mrs. Roosevelt knew she was dying, she called her back to be with her private nurse. And so my mother has built a church on that same property, and my mother's passed also now.
But you're looking for help
For help with
with this historic restoration.
Exactly.
Who should they contact? You personally?
The Carpenter's House Ministry,
Carpenter's House
yes,
Ministry?
and Janice Grant, but I don't
And we'll have a number going across the bottom of the screen where they'll be able to call and help you with that.
exactly. The number would be 443-540-4229.
All right. And you're looking for help for the restoration. I'm sure you're looking for fundraising as well as people with strong backs.
We were hoping to use that house for female veterans with children who are homeless.
Have I got the person to hook you up with? I'll talk to you about that later.
Great.
With all the things you've done, what was the highlight of all your experiences?
It's hard to pick out one thing.
Pick as many as you like.
Our friends, Mrs. Juanita Jackson Mitchell and Mr. Clarence Mitchell, and of course their sons, oh, they're such great people. She asked me the second year I was teaching if I would be a plaintiff to desegregate the schools in Harford County, and I was. And of course then later my husband and I were plaintiffs.
Now, our audience today may not have any inkling or even a concept of what you're talking about when you say desegregate the schools. Explain that a little bit.
All schools were segregated. When I went to college, I went to a black school only. And I was not permitted to go to a school of higher learning in this state. This state would pay you to go to any school you wanted to outside of Maryland and get a degree. So I looked on the map to see how far I could go and still be in United States, and it was California.
Okay.
So I went to UCLA to get my master's.
All right, so you were not allowed to go to anything other than a black school in the Baltimore or Maryland area. And that was the desegregation. And you say that the Mitchell family asked you?
Mrs. Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who herself was discriminated against.
Okay.
And so I was actually in 5 different suits in federal court. My husband and I spent our first wedding anniversary in federal court.
I have to admit, I'm jealous to a degree of all the things you've done. I'm envious, and I am very, very pleased to have met you and had you as our guest on the show today. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure being here.
But we have to say goodbye now to our audience because it's
All
time to
right.
go.
All
Bye-bye,
right.
everybody.
Thank you.
And we just
All
talk
right.
to each other as if we're just
Right.
kibitz.